Welcome to Theological Grazing.
So I've been talking a lot of Aristotle, and there was one thing in reading the Politics, and evidently I need to read his Ethics because I have not, and I've read anyway that this shows up in the Ethics as well. But reading the Politics at near the end of this book, Aristotle makes a distinction that, if I understand it right, I think has helped me to understand the Sabbath better. And not only that, but I actually think that these categories that he uses influenced, maybe even directly influenced, the way in which the Sabbath is spoken of in the Westminster Confession of Faith. Now, I don't know any of this to be true. I've not been able to look into this much deeper, but I think that's possible. The same language is used, and so I think it's possible. And it would make sense because this is a very common idea, evidently, in the Western tradition. I am just an ignorant man who is just on the cusp of discovering the Western tradition, or at least that's how I feel in my life. But near the end of the Politics, Aristotle makes this distinction between work and recreation and amusement. So that's the second category. There are three categories. One category, work. One category, recreation and amusement. And the last category is leisure. Work is that which you do toward another end. So it's not an end in itself. So for instance, you go to work and you work so that you make money, so that you can buy something, so that you can take care of your family, so that you can build a house, etc., etc. That's what work is, right? It's productive activity towards some other end. Recreation and amusement is that which you do not as an end in itself, but as a means to rest from and prepare to go back to work. So these are the things you do to kind of, cool off at the end of the day, relax a little bit so that you can go back and work more. In my estimation, these two categories are the only two categories that we use to think of our time. I think this is how most of us understand even the Sabbath. That the Sabbath is the Lord's Day. This is a day when we're just supposed to relax a little bit so that we can get ready to go back to work. This is why when we read the Westminster Confession of Faith and it says that we're supposed to cease from our recreations, I think we get kind of worked up. And a lot of men in the PCA, for instance, will take an exception to that portion of the confession. And we get worked up about it because that's all we know how to do outside of work, is to recreate and to amuse ourselves. However, this third category is what's so important then. This third category of leisure. Leisure is that time not spent without any activity, but it's that time spent with activities that are ends in themselves. Leisure is the time spent doing something that is an end in itself. For instance, worship. Now, Aristotle doesn't, I think, directly talk about this, but worship, right? Worshiping God. This is not something that you do so that you get something out of it, so that it does something for you. You worship God as an end in itself, right? You worship God to worship Him. That's it. That's an end. Much music can be this way. There's a kind of maybe practicing of music that would not be an end in itself, but just making music, singing together, especially what's done in worship, but not exclusively, I don't think. This too is an end in itself. The life of the mind is you sit around and you contemplate the things of God and the things of His world, right? This too, this can be an end in itself. And when you do that in fellowship with others, when you meet together and you reflect upon God and His world and the way that He has made things, all of this and so many other things are these ends in themselves, where you spend time doing that which is good in and of itself. It's not meant for another end. It's not meant for anything else. It just is, complete as it is. Now, I'm sure that I'm not quite describing that exactly right, but in reading this from Aristotle, I couldn't help but think that I've just not had the right categories to understand the role of the Sabbath in the Christian life. Here I've thought that it really is just a day for, that relaxation that you need to go back to work, but that's not it at all. The Sabbath day is not purely meant to, just relax. So you can't just say, well, I relax by whatever. I feel most rested when I do, when I go hiking or, whatever it might be. When I watch TV, when I'm, engaged in the latest football game. That's not the question, right? That doesn't really matter, okay? Because we're not talking about recreation and amusement when we're talking about Sabbath rest. I think what we're talking about and what Scripture is implying is similar to, at least, if not the same, as what Aristotle recognizes as leisure. It's that time spent doing things that are ends in and of themselves. And so this is just really kind of captured me, gripped me, and now I'm really thinking more on my own life and how I can implement this way of living, where particularly the Lord's Day, the Sabbath, is set aside for leisure. It's set aside for these things which are ends in themselves. And not that you can't do some of those things throughout the week, but you are engaged, hopefully, in significant amounts of work. You're hopefully being very productive throughout the week. And then on the Lord's Day, you can enjoy those things which are simply goods in themselves, with no thought to that which will come from it, that which would be produced from it, but rather just enjoying, the life of the mind and contemplating on the things of God and worship and singing and fellowship and especially feasting. I didn't mention feasting, but I think feasting is so central to this leisure time of the Sabbath. So I'll talk on this more at some point. I'm sure it's something that's fresh in my mind and I'm very gripped by, but I hope that these categories can be helpful for you. And if you're an Aristotle scholar and you think, wow, that guy got it totally wrong, let me know. I don't know. Maybe I did. But either way, I think that these are really helpful categories for us as we contemplate the Sabbath. Well, that's all, folks. If you could help me out, rate and review this podcast, share it with a friend, go ahead and email me if you have any questions. We're out.